Hey everyone in Birdland, here comes another episode of Out There with the Birds, the podcast with your Out There hosts, Ben Lizdas and Bill Thompson III. Out There with the Birds is supported by Koa Sporting Optics, makers of the legendary 883 Promenade Spotting Scope. To learn more, visit sportingoptics.koa-usa.com. Additional support comes from the Reader Rendezvous Birding Adventures from Birdwatchers Digest. Come birding with us in our favorite places. Learn more at birdwatchersdigest.com/RR. And now here they are, Bill and Ben.
Welcoming back from the heart of Cheeseland, America's Dairyland, Ben Lizdas in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. Ben, welcome back to Out There with the Birds. This is episode 20. We finally hit double figures.
Double figures. It's about time. I've enjoyed the whole experience up till now, though. Now I can't wait till we hit triple figures. What's that look like? What if we hit a triple figure? What's that number? 333 episodes?
I think it's 3,333 and a third episodes.
All right. We should maybe think about bumping these up to once a week then, huh?
Yeah, I don't want to get all sciencey on you, though. So, speaking of science, the United States and the Caribbean, we've been beset by a couple of really, really serious catastrophic hurricanes. And I know that was a theme that you wanted to talk about today. What do you want to talk about these hurricanes, other than how devastating they've been for everyone?
Yeah, so right now, as we're recording this, we're kind of dealing with the aftermath of Harvey, which came into Texas, hit Texas, Houston really bad, and Houston's a major
Rockport really bad.
Rockport. I mean, coastal birding in Texas is big. You've got High Island down there, you've got Rockport, you've got Port Aransas, and Houston is kind of the jumping off point for a lot of those things. I know a lot of people in Houston. I've done a lot of work with Houston Audubon in the past. So right now they're kind of just starting to assess all the work that has to be done from Harvey. And then now you have Hurricane Irma. As we're recording this, it hasn't hit Florida yet. By the time people are listening to this, it will have hit Florida, and that story will have been told. So that's been on my mind lately for sure. Thinking a lot about that, reading about some of the impacts that with like small endemic species populations that that these storms have. It's it's really kind of troubling.
I've been fascinated by birds in extreme weather for a long time, and there's been a debate among bird migration and weather experts whether or not birds are super affected by weather. I mean, is the reason that magnificent frigate birds show up in Ohio after a big tropical storm, is that because the storm blew them there? Or we don't, some science shows that that's true, but I know it's not true for passerines and land-based birds, but it can be true for pelagic birds and ocean-based birds that aren't used to perching, and what their strategy is to ride the storm out on the wing. Things like frigate birds and gannets and boobies and shearwaters and albatrosses, and even some small things like auklets and whatnot that, these things have shown up after severe storms far inland. I'm wondering, there were several endangered birds down there in the path of Irma that they were worried about. We've got the whooping cranes that probably aren't down to Aransas yet.
They're not down there yet, although the International Crane Foundation's field office in Rockport, Texas, has been totally destroyed from what I hear.
Yeah.
So certainly operations to kind of monitor and protect that species are absolutely, I guess you'd say, jeopardized. But thankfully, the birds themselves weren't down there to endure that. Now, what's going to be left of their habitat, the grounds that they, go crabbing on, who knows?
Right.
But,
it's interesting. When Katrina happened, the summer before Katrina, we had something like 300 hummingbirds estimated that were using our feeders during the course of one day. This was at the peak, late summer. All the fledglings are out from a brood or two. The males are still there. The adult females are still there. We've never gotten back to that level, but in the several years after Katrina, we would have 12 hummingbirds. And that's using, the times 6 multiplier.
Okay.
So the way that Bob and Martha Sargent came up with that, along with some other hummingbird banders, that they would band hummingbirds in a southern backyard in the southeast part of the United States, and they would keep catching hummingbirds that were unbanded from these well-trafficked feeders.
Mm-hmm.
They came up with the estimate of, you could say, at a busy feeding station, if you took the number you could see at once and you multiplied it by 6, that would give you the total number of hummingbirds that were probably using your gardens and feeders during the course of a day. I thought that was fascinating. I've used that many times. It's not rigorously scientific, but so if you had 3 that you could see at once times 6, that would say that you probably had 18 hummingbirds using your feeder at once.
Mm-hmm. So the connection between Katrina and the impact of the birds that you're seeing on your hummingbird feeder, essentially you're thinking the population took a major hit.
I do. I think hummingbirds might be the exception to passerines that are able to perch and grip and hold. So read a couple of articles about this in researching our podcast episode today. And first of all, birds are really tuned into weather. So when they sense the barometric pressure changing, they can go into a feeding frenzy and then get out or seek shelter. Passerines are pretty good at gripping and holding on without expending a lot of extra energy to a perch, no matter, and if they can get into the lee side of a tree or a branch or a hillside or whatever, and they can grip onto something and ride out the storm. That's often what they do. Others will get the heck out of Dodge and go somewhere else. They tracked a gannet that went way out off the continental shelf and waited until the storm was over and then came back into New Jersey when Sandy was hitting. So one of the things that I think may have happened to those hummingbirds at Katrina was that was right when all those hummingbirds were either going across the Gulf headed south or around the Gulf headed south. And we know that ruby-throated hummingbirds, which is the species I have here in Ohio, they do both. They go across the Gulf and they go around the Gulf. And when it hit, it probably caught lots and lots and lots of those tiny birds migrating and just blew them into nothing. So I know our hummingbird numbers have never recovered since then.
And so you see a big dip in a relatively abundant species like that. You can see what a natural disaster can do anecdotally to a population like that. And then think of something like the Barbuda warbler.
Right.
Okay, so this is an endemic warbler to the island of Barbuda. There's thought to have a global population of somewhere between 1,000 and 2,500 birds. The hurricane Irma that just came through there like 2 days ago from when we're recording this podcast, maybe it was even yesterday, I don't recall, essentially engulfed the entire island, Category 5, went through it. The whole island was decimated. At this point, I don't think anyone has any idea. People are rightly concerned about all the human beings there who are trying to survive. Exactly. But what the fallout's going to have an event like this, you could look at a situation where you could have a possible species extinction. There. The Cozumel thrasher, an endemic thrasher that lived in this island off of Mexico, had a very stable yet small population. It was Hurricane Gilbert in 1988 goes through there and pretty much wipes out the population. What Gilbert didn't get, they suspect that boa constrictors that were introduced and whatnot took the rest of them, but a bird that's thought to have gone extinct. Once again, small endemic population, natural disaster like this comes ahead. And we talked about International Crane Foundation and the whooping cranes. I think this was really part of the strategy behind them, the International Crane Foundation, working to have 2 separate flyways and separate flocks of whooping cranes. They have the Texas flock and the Florida flock, knowing that both of these species winter in hurricane zones, and figuring, if one population really gets impacted from a natural disaster, we've got a second population at a different location. Granted, look at this year. So we've got 2 major hurricanes. One's hitting Texas already, and one's hit Florida. So even the best laid plans, right? Yeah,
and I just saw in the news today, we're only just coming up to the halfway point on September 10 of hurricane season. So probably more to come. And of course, whether you're a climate change believer or a climate change acceptor or a climate change denier, you can't escape the fact that our weather is getting more and more violent. We had tons of rain this summer in parts of the country. Other parts have been going through drastic droughts. I mean, our weather...
Major fires in Washington right now.
Yeah, our weather's just going nuts.
Hmm. Yeah, it seems like part of the country's burning, part of it's underwater right now. And obviously, major concern for all of the people who are affected and impacted by these things immediately. And you think of some of the long-term impacts that this has on infrastructure and industry and the economy of these places. And some of these economies really are impacted by bird watchers and wildlife watchers. So it's, once we get to a point in the future where we're looking at reconstruction phases or rebuilding phases of these economies, I think of places like Winnie, Texas, right outside of Houston. They were covering Winnie, Texas on National Public Radio yesterday because it's all underwater, small agricultural community. And I don't think of Winnie, Texas as an agricultural community. I think of it as base camp for High Island and the
Right.
spring migration event that goes there. And so I would go to Winnie, Texas, get a hotel room there, spend 4 or 5 nights there, and go down to Houston Audubon's High Island sanctuaries to birdwatch. People from all over the world go and stay in Winnie to go for the bird watching, touch in all their restaurants, their hotels are filled. And I'm really hoping that as birders, there's still that momentum, that economic impact that we can have to help in our own little ways as a group of, people who appreciate that area, go in and act to do a little bit of revitalization in that area.
Well, I was thinking about Rockport, Texas. Our friends Ann and Ernie have a house down there, and I was involved years ago in the Rockport Hummerbird celebration that goes on every September. And that's a place that gets tons and tons of ecotourists, whether they're bird watchers or fishermen or beach goers or people who want to go down there and see the whooping cranes, or there's a lot to do along that part of the Gulf Coast, and everybody there is tied to the outside.
Yeah.
So you really do hope that when things are cleaned up and cleared up and everyone's starting to rebuild, that the bird watching and the ecotourism dollars will still be coming in to help rebuild those communities and support them.
Have you ever sat through a hurricane before?
Yeah. Gloria. I was in New York City for that. I don't think it was anywhere near the hurricanes that, Sandy and Ivan and Harvey and Irma. I was in an office building in Midtown Manhattan for a while, and I was on the 19th floor, and the building started shaking and moving back and forth. My friend that was there, he and I left and walked all the way up through Central Park and went to my apartment on 108th Street and Central Park West in a, let's say it was a transitioning neighborhood at that time. Sounds really fancy, but it was not a good neighborhood. And everybody was battening down the hatches. The bodega was sold out of everything on the corner. And we just kind of rode it out. It wasn't super devastating. There were broken windows and down trees and out of power for a while. But my parents rode out one in the late 50s, like 57 or 58. They rode out one in Avalon, New Jersey. And my dad was a reporter for the Associated Press, or I think United Press International, and stayed down there to report on it. And it ended up not being a super severe one, but they always talked about the epic party that they had, waiting for the hurricane, wondering if this was, of course, this was back in the days before they had great predictors.
Yeah.
They had weather balloons and stuff like that and some satellite imagery, but not like we've got today. Everybody's wondering, is this my last night on Earth? And gosh, you just feel for the people that are in the path of these devastating things. You realize that life is a very fragile thing.
Yeah.
I always wonder about people choosing to leave or not. And I notice a lot of these hurricanes now, with our better predictive ability with radar and computer modeling, they are issuing some leave or be arrested kind of orders in these places. And I know people are very full of pride, and I'm going to stick it out and weather the storm literally, but I don't know anymore. I think I would, if I lived in the path of one of those things, I think I'd really, really listen and evacuate.
Disasters like this happen, and it inevitably brings wildlife and humans closer together. Not necessarily in a good way, but you're having animals displaced, having somewhere to go, humans displaced, seeing somewhere to go, and they're all gravitating towards the same spot. Some place with high ground, a little bit of shelter. And you get situations that I hear about, these giant rafts of floating fire ants in Houston. That sounds terrifying to me. I don't know if you see it, things like that. But, whether it's snakes, mice, etc., you've got these fires happening in Washington, and all the wildlife coming down from the mountains trying to escape these coming into residential areas. And I saw some warning that some local authorities had put out I think this was in the Portland area in Washington, saying bring your pets in at night, because realize that our city is becoming a corridor for wild animals who are fleeing these fires. And also, if you would be so kind, put out some water for these wild animals. They're escaping, they're fleeing things, they're hungry, they're in need of resources. So, do what you can. But there's a little bit of a sense like, I'm imagining myself in a situation where you're encountering these animals, and a little bit of a sense of we're all in this together, perhaps.
Yeah. Oh, hi, hungry mountain lion.
Yeah.
Here, kitty. I don't know. That sounds kind of scary. Like a little bit of like natural Jurassic Park.
Boy, interesting
Not so
times.
sure.
Well, I'm thinking, I've been thinking a lot about the folks at Houston Audubon, the folks at the Florida Keys Hawkwatch, a lot of birders that we know in the Florida and Texas area.
Absolutely.
And, hoping that they all end up coming through on the okay side of things for sure.
Sending out our protective energy to them for sure.
Mm-hmm.
On a happier note,
yes.
I have a musical recommendation.
All right.
For this episode. I figure number 20, we got to go with a classic. I heard just a little bit of the new Steve Earle and the Dukes album. Steve Earle is a guy who has had a long career as a musician. He's a singer-songwriter guy. He's written a lot of really great songs. He's struggled with addiction. He was on The Wire, that TV show The Wire, as like a drug counselor, recovering person. He was in HBO series on New Orleans, Treme. He was in Treme as well. He's a great musician, and his new album is called So You Want to Be an Outlaw. And I just heard a little bit about a couple parts of a couple of songs, and boy, it's classic Steve Earle, really good stuff. And he just played a show here in Marietta, Ohio at the People's Bank Theater, and I missed it because we were in England. And so I missed that show, but my friends said it was totally outstanding. So Steve Earle and the Dukes, So You Want to Be an Outlaw. Check it out.
So You Want to Be an Outlaw. All right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I want to be an outlaw, but I don't know if I want to be an outlaw, but I want to hear that album now anyways.
Now you want to hear the album. And if you steal the album, you are an outlaw.
You could be an outlaw of sorts.
But don't do that. Just buy it the normal way.
Yeah.
How do you consume your music, Ben? Because I was riding in a car the other day that has one of those satellite radio things, and it was phenomenal. I mean, it's expensive. It's like $200 a year, but I couldn't believe, don't like this song, hit the next channel, and it's like all Rolling Stones. Oh, cool. Get sick of that, hit the next channel, it's all Elton John. Hit the next channel, it's yacht rock. Hit the next channel, it's traveling road music.
Mm-hmm. What I usually do is there's a college radio station in this area that will play lots of great different music. There's no format of it. It's just whatever, kids are in there. And I find that, if you're between the age of 18 and 35, in my life anyways, that was the point where I was discovering music most rapidly. And it was always out there. So that's an age group where if I can listen to of people in that demographic playing new music, that's always, for me, a great source for new music, as are you, Bill. I always think about that. And then I'll go to my library and check out things and listen to it and on CD, which is very old school, I realize. And then, if I like it, I might get it digitally.
For you kids out there who don't know what a CD is, it's a little silver disc. It's about the size of a doily. Yeah. And if you don't know what a doily, oh gosh, we're just disappearing down a rat hole of old Wikipedia. All right, Ben. Hey, man, episode 20 in the can. Yeah. I obviously have some editing to do.
Yeah, I think so. I promise our listeners a little bit lighter subject matter next time we come out. But really, I think the hurricanes have been on a lot of people's minds. And always good to kind of look at it with a birder context as well, because us birders tend to think of situations and things that perhaps are a little bit different or quirky from the rest of our fellow human beings.
We see things through a feathered lens, but the main thing is we want everybody to be safe out there.
Yeah, and then I would encourage, as we come around towards the cycles of migration and opportunities where these communities that have been impacted are rebuilding, that birders flock down there, enjoy the birds, spend money at restaurants, stay in hotels, and are present and participating in the rebuilding of some of these communities that have been impacted.
Oh, yeah. And if you can't do that, contribute to the relief efforts.
Absolutely. Ideally, you're doing both.
Yep. All right, Ben. Good to talk to you, buddy. I think the next time I see you, you're going to be flying down here. We're going to be driving on your birthday to Philadelphia.
That's right. The American Birding Expo coming up next. In fact, I have a feeling that might have something to do with episode 21. What do you think?
I think so.
All right. Sounds good, Bill.
Take care, buddy.
Yeah, bye.
That's all she wrote for this episode of Out There with the Birds. Special thanks to Koa, our optics sponsor. Learn more about their fine line of birding products at sportingoptics.koa-usa.com. We're also supported by the Reader Rendezvous Birding Adventures from Birdwatchers Digest. Your next birding adventure starts at birdwatchersdigest.com/rr. Until we meet again in 2 weeks, keep your diopter adjusted and we'll see you out there with the birds. Cheers!